Hi, Shannon. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Brad, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
No, it's absolutely my pleasure. And yeah, I'm happy we were able to get this connected here pretty quick because I love your story. And we've talked more than a few times and we should have hit record on this conversation. So I'm like,
It's,
you know what? Let's get this scheduled and we'll share it with the audience. And kind of before we get into your escapee journey, why don't you share with the audience just a little bit about what you're doing today, who you work with, and then we'll go back in time a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. So right now I'm doing a combination of fractional and project management in the HR world and people. And I work with owners and CEOs kind of in a company growth mode who have grown organizations before and they understand how people mistakes can impact and have really direct financial consequences if they're not handled in an early stage. So we focus on that. And the work itself looks like, building infrastructure, something that's going to drive business results through human performance is the idea of the work itself.
And how long have you been solo?
I have officially been solo for 2 years.
Okay.
Oh my
What's
gosh, is it two,
impressive?
2.5? Yeah.
The time's gonna fly by. How precise, or maybe precise, how clear you are on who you want to work with and the work you want to do. I mean, it took me 2 years just to kind of even figure out what I kind of wanted to do, and I still think I'm working through it. But it seems like you figured it out pretty quick where you, I don't know if it was where your strength was or where you like to work. Let me ask you, so where you're at today, is this where you started 2.5 years ago, or have you kind of worked into this?
Yeah. Oh, heck no. Lessons learned 100%. And yeah, I think it's something I probably knew instinctively at the beginning, because if you know anything about HR, you know it has a reputation and people have certain belief systems about it depending on what their past experiences have been. And I found that in working with groups who were trying to grow their organization early on that maybe hadn't done it before, is that it was very easy to say, oh, we don't need that, or we don't need that now, or that doesn't make sense, or that's too costly. However, those who have done it before know that it costs a lot less right now than it will when we grow 50 additional people or X million out of dollars later because things get out of hand. And so it's I want to say it's kind of the path of least resistance. I want to help people who want to get results quickly.
Yeah, I think that makes so much sense and smart, right? Because again, with what we do, we don't need a ton of customers. So why not focus on the ones that get it so you don't have to educate them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I completely. I'm all right. I'm going to take us down this first rabbit hole before we even go
Okay,
back in
let's do it.
journey, and just get your perspective on HR. Because over my 25 years, I worked with a lot of really good people in that
Mm-hmm.
space, and they were partners, for the most part, with me and in the business and these things. It just seems in the current corporate culture, I don't know if HR is taking a turn and they're asked to do something different with these layoffs, or is it just, kind of the way, the environment feels right now? I don't know if that made complete sense, but it just seems like HR, I don't say they're getting a bad name or they're, everybody's warning, hey, HR is just protecting the business. They're not your friend. They're not your
It's
partner.
a
And just
typical
curious
thing
your
to say, right?
perspective. You don't have to burn any bridges if you don't want, but just curious your
Yeah.
take on this right now.
Yeah. No bridges to burn here. I think in just the way that sales is a department and has a reputation, or marketing is a department and has a reputation, HR is a department and has a reputation, and everyone touches it. So that reputation is just a broader reach than anything else. And there is no 1 or 10 or 100 HR people that are the same. They don't have the same experiences. They haven't worked with the same kinds of companies. So I invite everyone to step back from that perspective and realize it's very individual. However, one generalization I will play into with it and my experience as an HR professional is that it's very rare that HR is driving any of the decisions that you see happening. However, most HR professionals, because they take their roles very seriously, will take the heat for everything because they believe that's the right thing to do. And I believe over time that has developed into they're just all terrible, when I think there's more nuance to it than that.
I think you're right. And again, and I thought maybe I was just on the right side of the equation of the folks that I worked
Got
with.
lucky,
And it's
yeah.
not, but yeah. So if you guys are still out there in corporate, right, you gotta don't be nice to your HR folks. They're just the execution piece of this a lot of the time. So anyway, all right. So let's go back in time. So you did message or mention some lessons learned, and we'll get to those as we go through the journey. But maybe give me just an overview of what your corporate career was and your last role before you made the decision to go solo, or the corporation made the decision for you to go solo. So maybe just those two, a little background on the career, and then take us to your last corporate role.
Yeah. I had a really eclectic career wise, really all over the place, truly grateful for it. But I can't say that it was very linear necessarily. I started in hospitality. I did some work in financial services, very heavily in learning and development, before I had an opportunity to jump into, I don't know, more HR proper, if you will, where I went into an organization that didn't have a lot of things in place, and I had the opportunity to build them. And I think that's where I really got hooked on the work, because I saw how much impact something like that can be from just the simple idea of taking some pressure off managers so they can do the work that they were hired to do, right? If your salesperson is managing their people all of the time, they might not be managing their sales. And I saw that right away. I could put processes together that would take that away. And so that's why I loved it so much. But I'll tell you, don't think, it took me a long time to figure this out, but I don't think I ever fit in. And it was really I did not have easy work. And it wasn't because the work wasn't enjoyable and I couldn't do it. It was my relationships with executives that I really struggled with. And I think it had a lot to do with challenging status quo, asking questions when people just wanted to move on, and just desiring for us to focus on results versus, I don't know, waiting out the budget or whatever else was happening. And think that I started to realize, when I started to really dig into it, I started to realize that, sometimes they're asking me to do things that were really counterintuitive to who I was. And, I maybe would not admit that it lacked integrity, but there were pieces of it that did. There were processes that didn't feel right. They might ask me to be quiet about something that I felt transparency was the appropriate solution. But ultimately, I didn't belong, Brett. I just
Yeah,
wasn't there.
it's so interesting and good for you to take that path, because I think back, I hit some of those crossroads as well. But instead of, fighting back and getting out, it was more conformed with just the process, right? I mean, because earlier in my career, I can think about the progression, and where you rock the boat a little bit and you question, this doesn't make sense. Why are we doing it this way? And then over time, as the years and the decades go by, just keep it in the box. Don't rock the boat. Get your job done. Push it. And even though, right, again, I came to that realization a little bit later than you did, but it was the same thing. And I think a lot of the folks, as you see, in our community, have hit that point. We all hit it at a different point, but it's interesting you said that, but you were able to figure it out right before you put another 5 years, 10 years into that type of work in the big corporates.
I wish I could say it was a really clear picture for me. But even though I was realizing that, I still felt stuck in it. I
Yeah,
didn't feel
interesting.
like, I never, ever, ever saw myself as owning my own business. In fact, people said it to me along the way. I was like, no, like, that's just not me. That's not who I am. But if I don't belong there and I don't belong here, where the heck do I belong? I don't get it. I think it took some of the push at the end. So I went through some turmoil. I think probably late or mid 2021, because I'd started a new job in late 2020. I was so excited about it. A few months in, they said, "Just kidding, we're going to be acquired." So
How's that?
then I was thrust into trying to figure out, and I went through a long job search process. And then I found a job that really quickly didn't work out. And I was starting to have conversations about, well, maybe I could try this. Let me talk to somebody. And I met with a consultant who really, there were actual butterflies in my stomach thinking about the possibilities. Like, I have to take control of my own fate because I can't rely on the market. What if I do this? What if I get into this? And I was so excited. And yet I still took another job because
Yeah.
I couldn't see myself out of that. But I think if anything, I am so grateful for that job because it was all the things, all the reasons that I didn't belong in corporate. And
Final
uh,
push that you needed
it,
to get
it
out.
was it. It was it. And so a year of that, and once I dropped that, I was ready. I was ready to go.
I want to go back to one thing you said, because I think a lot of us, me included, get to that point where we think it's either corporate or you have to start a company, like, or open a restaurant or a cafe or start a Google. And because I had a couple of entrepreneurial ventures out over the course of the 25 plus years in corporate, but obviously none of them worked out where I could stay out of corporate. But those were like building a company, right, multiple times. And I just didn't realize the option of solo was out there until, like I said, I've gone through the process over the last 4 years, from solo consulting to fractional to, some agency and those types of things, that it's really kind of flexible, but I didn't realize that was there. And all truthfulness, I don't think it really became more common until 2 or 3 years ago, right? It was more viewed as, freelance, can't get a job. You're on Fiverr or something like that. So,
Right. Or it was a step down. Oh, you have to do this because you
right. That's
different
such a
world
good
now.
point. Yes. All right. So let's go. You're in corporate and everything is wrong with this job. Are you starting to think, all right, I'm going solo. This is exactly what I want to do? Or were you more like me that said, hey, this isn't working. I'm out and I'll figure it out? Hindsight 2020, I would have gone the other way. But so where were you? What was that crossroads like?
Yeah. As that ended, I was terrified. I think I was pretty terrified. And I'm going to call it fortunate. Like, I want to say that I hit the pavement and I was so amazing at building business, but I wasn't.
Nope.
I was fortunate enough to connect with an agency who let me start out, and thank goodness, because I didn't have a sense of business development at all. And so I went into this agency, and then I got comfortable again. I was like, oh, well, this is comfortable. I don't have to worry about anything. And then I'm like, wait a minute. Maybe a few months in, I said, this is going to end eventually. Like, contracts don't last forever. I need to be realistic. And it wasn't actually to a year after that, a year after I started, is when I actually committed to an LLC. When I actually said, I'm going to do this. And I started building my network and engaging and talking to people. And I'm going to say, a mess at the beginning of that part of the journey, because I'm not sure I was prepared to be public, like to be a public, confident human. I didn't have it. But after starting some of that networking journey, I mean, people were pushing me. If I were in corporate and decided to do that, I don't think I could. But once I was exposed, if you will, like, I think there's things that
Yeah.
happen in you that you never believed that you could do, that you just can now, that you're able to put yourself out there with. That I didn't know was in me. But after putting myself in the situation, I found out a lot of cool things.
Yeah, I like a couple of things you said there too. One is getting comfortable. I mean, one of my favorite new expressions is getting comfortable being uncomfortable. I mean, it's kind of the world we live in now, and if you're comfortable being uncomfortable, you're going to find that success a little bit quicker. And I did the same thing when I left corporate. I didn't tell anybody, or very few people knew, for the first couple of years. And by the way, that's not a good way to grow a business. It is not letting people know. I get it. If you're still
Yeah.
in corporate, you got to be more stealth with it. But yeah, I think there was still that stigma that I was carrying around, that, oh, he's going solo. He couldn't hack it in the corporate world anymore, or doesn't want to start a real business. And so I just, it just, hindsight again, I would have done that differently. And like I said, once it opened up, and then I knew there was more of me out there, right? I would say it's in just over a year ago that I started to realize there's actually a lot of us out here they're fighting the same battles, but we're all doing it by ourselves, which is
Yeah.
kind of silly. So
And what if I fail, right? All these people that know you, I mean, it's an interesting thing because I've gone out and done this and been more public with who I am, but I still feel like the same frightened child inside when I'm doing that. But people who knew me before go, wow, you're doing such great things. Like, you'll succeed at anything you do. And I'm like, you have no idea what's happening in here. But I
yeah,
do think
yeah,
that
yeah.
people see you differently, and we have to have more faith in those who have been with us all the years. And real,
Yeah, and confidence in ourselves, right? The imposter syndrome is real, and it's again. I tell my timeline for folks is it usually takes a few months to get some level of success, whether that's your first customer by yourself or two customers, depending on the type of work that you're doing. After about a year, I was comfortable that I think I can do this, right? I had that belief that I could do it, but it wasn't until year two where I'm like, all right, now I know I can make money. I figured out how to
mm-hmm.
do this. Sometimes it may not be the most ideal, but now I know I'm not going back. And then years 3 and 4 has just kind of grown and pivoted and got more focused on what I want to do. And, it's some of the things. So like I said, I think if people have the thought that, hey, I'm going to quit and then be super successful in 2 months and
It's
replace your
magic.
income, not realistic. But you can absolutely have success, and a year out, you probably can't figure out how to make that money back. But it is a lot less time if you're organized. Right. So
Right.
anyway,
But I think also in those first 6 to 12 months, you realize your priorities are different than you thought. Like, you got
yeah,
out because of the pain, but that pain's gone. There's a whole new set of pain, but there's something about it that's more tolerable because I don't know if you have control over
it's
it. You
your
have the
pain.
ability it's your pain. And then you start to realize there are things that you didn't know that you wanted before because you can.
Yeah, I'm curious if you felt this way because it was when I left, I just want to make more money than what I was making in corporate. But then I discovered the time. I had forgotten how valuable time was. And then once I discovered time, like, well, if I want to be healthier and, try to get wellness. So it just became this overall balance of things that I didn't know that I wanted until I got a taste of it. And then I get mad at myself. I'm like, why did I wait so long? But can't go back in time, so I can only look forward. But yeah, when you said that, the things that were important when I left are very different than where they're at right now.
Right. I think for me, because of my relationship with corporate, I just wanted to prove that I could do it without them, that they didn't win some sort of
Exactly.
sick,
Such a
twisted
good
way.
point. All right, so now that we meandered a little bit, let's go back to after, let's say you're a mess. How did you get straightened out those first couple months? Was it the first customer? How did you find your first customer? And did you have a set offering? Give us a little bit of where you were early
Yeah,
on, and
right.
then we can kind of mature with
As
you.
I had mentioned that my first group was with an agency. I had connected with an agency that was working with things and really connected there. My first client outside of that, right? I decided, hey, I need to do things that's going to last forever. My first client outside of that came from networking.
Oh, good.
So yeah, I engaged in a handful of groups. I started meeting people, and I stopped being awkward about meeting people. I think the one thing I struggled to get over at the beginning was that, I thought you were supposed to be shy about selling, like you're not supposed to be overt about it. But there's a big gap in between shy and overt, right? There's somewhere in the middle where you can just be proud of what you're doing and be willing to talk about it, and not be weird and slimy. And so once I figured out that was possible, I could run with it because I wasn't afraid of talking to a stranger over a virtual coffee and just being that person that I
Yeah,
knew was there. For whatever reason, I just didn't think it was possible. And I noticed that people were more receptive. And I was like, wow, all of these people on virtual coffees are way nicer than I expected. This is great. Let's do more.
yeah. People generally are happy to help, right? Where they
Mm-hmm.
can, and because you're not competing for the same positions. There's more than enough opportunity for everybody. And so I'm curious, when you're looking for that first gig outside of it, one of the things that I did, I was way over indexed on how tight the offering needed to be and what it was going to be and how I was going to do it. And I'm like, you know what? It just, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but having the flexibility going into conversations, knowing it's just so much easier. And I still spend a lot of time with newbies on that aspect because they want to have the perfect offering and they want to do, I'm like, you can convince me otherwise if that works. That's why I'm kind of curious to see where, kind of the early days of offerings to maybe where you're at today and how that's kind of changed.
My journey started with hourly work. And I think that taught me a lot. I think that a lot of companies, because they operate right now with an hourly or salary mindset, that's just an easy way to process, right? And so a company who wants to hire, say, a fractional, they want to hire them, well, give me your hours, right? But it's really not that. Like, as a fractional, I can do a lot of work for a lot less time. And all I'm doing is hurting myself. If I cut those hours down, oh, I can do that in an hour. Great. Well, somewhere else, or if you hired somebody to do it, or if somebody in-house was doing it, would take much longer and waste a lot more time. So I learned really quickly that hourly was not the path for me and what the kind of things that I offer. So now I have 3 types of offerings. One is a hotline. So it's like an emergency line that it's really a retainer, but it's a small, low-level retainer for those who really don't need on-site work, but also things come up and they need somebody to trust. I do project management. So just something that needs to get done, we can go in and do. And then I'll do a retainer fractional long-term. And I think what's interesting is I've heard folks say, well, you start with the retainer side, right? For me, it's the opposite. So because of my experience with corporate and being with various executives where I thought they were a certain thing when I interviewed with them, and it was a completely different thing when I left, I want to start with project management and hotline work. And if those relationships are solid, then I'll turn it into a more retainer or long-term fractional engagement.
Yeah, I like that. I've really, again, the good and the bad of my journey is, right, I went from management consulting at the end of my career to solo consulting, which is definitely more of a fixed time, fixed fee type of an approach, into the fractional, which then got into, wasn't hourly. The owners like to move it into, well, how many hours am I getting for this? Or this, even if you don't get
Right?
there, there's
It's
still
always
in
the
their
question.
mind, there's how many hours you're getting in. Then I realized that I was really limiting how I can help, right? Because some business, that's why I love your hotline idea, right? It's, hey, you just need a little bit of help right now. I can provide it. You have some team members that need some either coaching or mentoring. We can provide it. So I think if you go in with that approach, hey, I know what I solve this type of problem. In your case, it's for growth businesses that need some infrastructure. I can meet you where the business is. And I find on the lower end, or the smaller deals, in the sense like the hotlines and those, it's actually more of a premium pricing. You're getting paid more per hour than you are with the longer term deal. So I'm
It's
more
like an
than happy to
insurance
spend.
policy, right? You
Yeah.
pay a lot of money for insurance and don't always use it, right? But you want some of that.
And
I would
actually,
encourage,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry.
I would say I would encourage anyone as they're building their pricing model and they're getting the question about how many hours, that they're changing that conversation to what are the results? Here are the results I can provide, because that allow you to price in a way that functions best for you and what you're able to put in time-wise.
Yeah, it makes sense. And again, if we have too many small deals, it's tougher to manage, but not really. I mean, I just think like I said, there's enough small businesses that, and again, I love the insurance. I'm starting to use that in my sales pitch sometimes, that, hey, if we can get a small engagement together, I'll get to know your business. And then when things go sideways or you really need some help, I'll know exactly where you're at, versus if you don't partner with anybody, just have somebody come in and do this one-time project, then you have something else you're going to have to bring somebody in and completely educate them on your business, get up to speed, waste a lot of time. So it's almost an insurance policy for the business owner
Mhm.
to say, hey, just we can do a small engagement now, and I'm here when you need. Hopefully you don't need me, but if you do, I'll be here for you.
And if you have to do that, if you have to start from scratch, you could be losing a lot more money out the door in the long run because you're creating more damage by the time taken.
Yeah. And curious too from a pricing standpoint, because the one, again, I use this a lot is, right, you couldn't afford to hire me full time. And but looking at it from a fractional or another, it's you get all the good stuff without the overhead or the unnecessary meetings, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're just paying for the quality, which is the output. Sometimes there's stuff that has to go on in between, but it just seems like a much better deal for both the business and for you or me or anybody that's going into this solo. But yeah, we still have a hard time kind of grasping that approach, and I'm not sure. It just seems like a logical fit from both sides, so I'm not sure why it hasn't clicked a little better yet. But curious what you see in that.
It's hard to speculate about the real psychology of that, but
True.
there is something psychologically safe in having an employee, and it's just their job to do things. And if they don't, it's not really your fault, and you don't have to engage with it. But if you've hired a consultant or somebody fractional to do work, the expectation is results. You are moving forward. Unless you really want to move forward, maybe that's not the choice that you want to make, because it's a lot easier to push things off and to slow things down when you have an employee. There's a lot more excuses to build.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, the one I don't know if it's an analogy, but the way I explain it sometimes is when you're an employee, right? The the company has all the power, right? In return for the salary, you're going to do everything I say. You're going to work on what I want you to work on, the times, et cetera, et cetera. And like a consultant or more of a freelancer, it's transactional, right? This business needs XYZ done. You can do XYZ. It's good. But when you start moving into the fractional, and I would think even like some of the hotline and stuff, it's more of a partnership where both sides have a say in it, right? You don't like it, you can walk away. They don't like it, and it just, again, it makes for better, well, from both sides, right? It's that's why I'm so optimistic. This is the future. It just makes too much sense. You're right. We need to get through the psychology of it a little bit, but it's
Help
going to happen.
train those and owners what partnership looks like, because it's not a threat on you, your ego, your knowledge, your capabilities. Opportunity to make your business better, and get the pat on the back you deserve. Because you just owning and doing everything, one, you're going to get overwhelmed and not do it, right? And
Yeah.
people are going to
Yeah.
respect that you're smart enough to know that others are smarter in their specific areas.
Yeah. There's a
Smartest
great book. I
CEOs
don't
are
know
the
if you,
ones that hire the ones that are
know,
smarter than them.
and they know, right? It's who, not how, right? And I don't know if you've read that book, but I love that book. It opened my eyes. It's like, it's exactly right. Go surround yourself with who's that are specialties in the areas you're not. Let them figure out how to do it because they like to do it, right? Most of the
Exactly.
time as business owners, we don't focus on the things because we don't like it or we're not good at it.
Yeah. I had read a book recently that says, the CEOs, it's your job to figure out the what you want to happen and hire a team that figures out how to make it happen. You should not be involved in that. You've got other things that you've got to do. And so if we can train more CEOs and owners to feel that way, I think business will skyrocket. It's got so much potential.
Yeah, I think I'm 100% confident we're going this. I don't think big corporate's going to be able to turn that boat around, but I do think small and mid-sized companies have a massive opportunity if they can embrace this. So, all
And
right. So
create some serious
let me,
competition for corporate in that message. So
I think so. Less
yeah.
overhead. I mean, because if you think about it, because one of the things I studied for a while was the one-person business model. They're doing $1 million with one employee, right? Some are now doing $2 million with one employee. If you take some of those concepts that they're using and apply it to a small business, right? Some of the small businesses I worked with that were, 2 to 4 million in revenue had, 20 plus employees. I'm like, this
Mhm.
isn't going to work. I appreciate you want to bring all these folks in, but that's not a good ratio anymore in the sense of how this is going to work. So I think the solo business, you and I are starting to help figure out what the future business model looks like. And it's much more of a like an ecosystem than it is the way companies are structured today. So
I love the thought of
um,
it that way. An ecosystem.
it's just need more business owners, which we'll get on. It's just, again, it's slowly, but we're getting there. All right, so let's go to, all right, now you've got things figured out, right? More so you're starting to get comfortable with everything. How did you get to that next step, right? Where you can, you're fairly confident. Like I said, we all have imposter syndrome. How did you
Sure.
start getting those next customers? Was it referrals? Was it the same networking? And maybe talk about how much time you spend networking versus actually doing the work, so people can get a sense of, are you doing this 3 days a week, 1 day a week? What's kind of your
Mhm.
cadence for new business?
I have really relied on networking. And the reason why that works for me is, as I said before, I'm already working uphill from a non-trusted business. And so for me, it's the building of relationships that help people see that I'm not one of those HR people or whatever it is, however it is
Yeah.
that they see it, right? And for those who don't even believe in HR in the first place, I'm not a threat to them. I'm not a threat to their business. I want to help them get better. And I'm not going to impose myself or make barriers and rules that don't exist. So I can only get that in discussions. So networking is really good for me. And I also like to meet with small groups of local owners of companies, because when we can get in and talk about that little stuff that's challenging, compliance is always a really good open conversation because everyone has to deal with it and no one wants to learn it because it's boring and doesn't always make sense and it's unpleasant. So I find that if I can make that an easier view, if I can help break it down and take the chaos out of compliance, that often helps me build trust. And frankly, I'm working a long game, right? That's what the hotline's about. I'm working a long game that right now you don't need anything. There may be a moment that you do. And we'll get there if that's the right thing.
Yeah, no, I like it. I think that's, again, more and more folks that I meet with and talk to, we're all in it for the long game, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't see myself finishing my in corporate for, 20 years. There's just no way. But, again, I want to control my time. I want to work on the things I want to work on, and how much I dedicate to it, it'll be in my control. So I think I definitely see quite a bit of that. So, all right, I've
And
got
I
a
genuinely
couple
want to
more.
help people, right? So that way they're not messing up right now, even if they can't, pay a lot. That's okay.
Exactly. Hey, because we can be more efficient with our time. We're only charging for outputs, right? It's a good model. So, all right, the one I get asked a lot, and I needed to do a better job in the podcast getting information, is tactically, what did you do in the early days? Did you set up an LLC? Did you have a website, LinkedIn page? Can you kind of talk about what you did is kind of part one of that question. So the tactical, and then let's go into some advice, right? What would you have done differently, and what advice are you giving to, potential solopreneurs at this point?
When I really started to launch, I started with technology. Things to make it easier so I didn't have to do a lot of work. So I got some work with invoicing. As I mentioned, I was doing time. So I wanted a time software that would help me work through it very easily and quickly and let me use multiple jobs at once. So that was the big piece for me. Then I got an LLC. And I'm only just now working on a website. I just didn't feel the need for it yet. I wasn't there. I made up my own little logo, months ago, but now I'm working on a real one to put something in front of people. But I've really heavily relied on LinkedIn as a place where people could go to look for that credible source of information. I've taken some LinkedIn courses from people that I trust that have helped me understand it better. I would say from a marketing perspective or just from a homepage perspective, that's where I have landed. And having a great profile does make a difference. It has sucked me into buying things that I didn't think I would either. So I'm hoping that will do the same to others.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I'm with you. It's because I do get that question a lot. I'm like, do I need a website? I'm like, you honestly don't, right? I mean, you look at the Corporate Escapee, what we've got growing. I don't have a website for that yet. It's in process. We have a community, but there's not a website yet. And even with what I was doing with my solo work, it relied heavily on LinkedIn because that's where people are going to validate. How did you actually do this with these big companies you said? And I'm like, yeah,
It is.
it's there.
And people will say that, well, you have to have a website, otherwise you're not a legitimate business. Maybe 5 years ago, but this is a different place. I can't even think of the last person whose website I went to, after seeing something on LinkedIn, because I didn't need to. I got everything I needed right there. It's pretty easy.
Yeah. Honestly, the only time I do that is if the LinkedIn page didn't answer my question about what they do.
Mm-hmm. You're like, okay, I got to dig in further.
But then most of the time the website's not telling me either. If you can't tell me clearly in LinkedIn, then we can move in. I will say that go ahead.
I do think from a website perspective, when you get to the stage where you can't handle all the incoming requests, it's a nice place for filtering. Or if you've got a product, I think that if you're truly productized on a few things, then the website is a great move.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think when I tell people with the LLC, you don't have to, but I think once you're 100% committed that you're going to do this, or at least try this, then it makes sense. And every state's different, so this is not legal advice or any of those things. But but what I've heard from a lot of people more recently, as they're starting to go through this journey, is when I got my LLC, it just empowered me, right? It flipped a switch and said, all right, this is now real. I have my own company. I'm like, you know what? Go with it 100%. It's because they're not that expensive and there's nothing wrong with having them. So like I said, I used to say, no, you don't need it until you get serious and get the momentum. But now I'm like, if that's that milestone for you, go do it. You're all in. Yeah, that's awesome. All
and
right,
then you asked about advice.
Yes.
I just have one piece of advice. Yeah. So don't do it alone. You can do it alone. It's possible. But don't, because there are so many people out there at the same stage as you or just a little ahead of you that you need to connect with. And by doing that, it will put you in a much stronger position. And not using a network, it's like taking the fire escape when you've got an escalator. Like, it makes no sense. Like, do good for yourself. Use your peers, use the people around you. Could not have made it or done what I have done without those people. Couldn't.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And and I forget, I think it was Ken Shamrock. He's an old UFC fighter, but somebody had asked about training or how he is successful. And I'm getting to why this ties in, because he said, I always work with 3 different types of training partners. One that's before me, trailing behind, that I can help bring along, somebody that's my speed, right? We have really good sparring sessions, and then somebody that's ahead of me because I'm learning from that person that's ahead of me. So if you're thinking from a networking standpoint, it's the same thing. Somebody slightly ahead, somebody you can go down the wall with together, and then start to bring some folks behind you that you're a little bit ahead of, because absolutely there's powers in number, and don't do it alone. And I did it way too long by myself. So that's such good advice.
I hope everyone takes it.
All right, Shannon, I'm sure there's going to be some folks that are going to want to connect with you after this. What's the best place for them to track you down? I mean, I guess LinkedIn, but
certainly not a website, because I'm just not there yet. But we're building right now. So yes, LinkedIn is the best place to connect. If anybody is in the Escapee group, I am on the Slack and happy to chat with anybody there as well, whatever makes sense.
And a shameless plug, if you're not in our Escapee group, what are you waiting for? There's more people like Shannon. There's 600 other people like us that are in there going through this journey at various stages. So if you're listening, you're curious, exactly, come join us. Education's free. I'm working on it. Education's free. The support's free. All it takes is just a little bit of time. So. All right, Shannon, thank you so much for spending some time. I really appreciate this. I'm glad we finally hit record on one of these conversations, and we'll bring you back. I always tell people we'll do in a couple months or maybe in a quarter or so, we're going to bring some folks back and just get an update. We'll see if you actually launch that website that you're going to launch. And if I get any questions from other folks, I'll pass them along as well.
That sounds great. Such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Shannon.